Hey, everybody. Welcome back once again to Salt the Streets podcast, the show where we discuss news, government, and culture and how it pertains to you, the individual, and your natural rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As always, we are your hosts. I am that big bird-looking fella they call Colin, and I am joined by my co-host, brother-in-arms, the Nero of Neoprene, the original Salt of the Street himself, Donovan. Donovan, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent, Colin. Thank you very much.
And today we are joined by a very special guest. Josh Keaton drove all the way down here from the Great White North of Washington State. He is known as a man with sitcom dad energy and an amateur historian, which I can't wait to poke about because I want to see how you consider yourself an amateur historian. I'm very excited about that. Welcome to the show, Josh. Thanks for coming. Donovan. Can you please tell the people where we are at in the Salt the Streets timeline and what it is today we're going to be talking about?
Yes, sir. Today is Saturday, July 9th. It's 12:10 p.m. This is episode 129 of Salt of the Streets. Today, we have a lot of big stuff going on. So first, we're going to do, of course, our Let Me Ask You This question. We're going to fire up that in just a little bit. Then we're going to get to know Josh a little bit so that we know who we're talking to, what we're getting into. And then we're going to end this segment by kind of leading ourselves into the next one. We're going to talk about the conclusion of the Bremerton High School, Joe Kennedy versus Bremerton School District Supreme Court case. And that will lead us into our second segment, our second part there. And we're going to talk about some other various different Supreme Court cases and the way that they have concluded. And in part three, we're going to be talking a couple of different things. Student loan forgiveness. We're going to be talking about the Don't Say Gay bill a little bit because you are a teacher, you're sub, right? And so we'll get into it a little bit later, but we've had a hell of a time getting people in here to talk to us about the Don't Say Gay bill. People who openly don't agree with us, and not that you don't agree with us, we haven't discussed it, but we've just had a hell of a time getting people in here to talk about this. So we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about, I built it to you as a leftist influence on education. And I told you that was just kind of the easiest way to put it under one distinct label. And so we'll dive in and kind of hash that out a little bit more as we get in. But when we say that, we really do mean leftist, not like Democrat or left-leaning. We mean like leftist, hardcore ideology, Marxist ideology that is potentially and intending to subvert the country itself, the society. That's kind of what we're getting at. So we'll parse through that a little bit more. And of course, we have the grab bag segment. We have just last night we found out that Elon Musk is no longer going to be purchasing Twitter. Twitter Jesus is not going to save us, right? So we found out about that. We have the Georgia Guidestones that were destroyed. One of them was destroyed earlier this week, and then they were taken down. And then we also have the Dutch farmer protest that is going on.
Yeah, buddy.
So that's scary. Have you heard about the Dutch farmer protest?
Vaguely. I was actually very interested to hear your takes because I need to learn more.
It's been real interesting.
Wild.
Yeah, wild stuff.
I did not know about that, and then we came to work on Wednesday, and Colin was like, "Yo, have you heard about these protests?" And I was like, I kind of saw mentions, and then he showed me videos and pictures, and the whole fucking interstates taken up and shit or whatever they call them there, freeways, whatever.
Yeah, whatever those Europeans call them things over there.
Yeah, the 10-lane highways that they have running through the middle of everything. So we have a great show for everyone going here. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Bilbo Swag, and obviously on the YouTube, we have our Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, all of that at Salt of the Streets. We have our own personal social media. I'm at Salt of the Street on Twitter, at alpaca_Donovan on Instagram. Colin's at Big Bird Offie on both those things. Do you want to pimp your social medias? You don't have to.
I'm good for right now.
All right, well, there we go. Josh is here with us, and saltofthestreets.com for all this information. That's it. Location skate shop, downtown Bremerton. Did you know that Ryan Martin opened up a skate shop?
Ryan Martin?
Ryan Martin.
Ryan Slogo Martin?
Yes.
Wow.
He opened a skate shop in downtown Bremerton. It's called Location Skate Shop, and they don't pay us or anything, but we pimp them regularly because it's a fantastic environment. We've been there many times, and he designed it. They designed it. He's one of the co-owners of it. They designed it as a spot for kids to go in the community to not cause trouble and be able to skate and have a positive environment. It's absolutely excellent. Yeah, no, and it's a beautiful shop too. It's excellently designed. He has a bunch of his photographs everywhere. It's very good.
It's a great spot for skating too because it's right there on 4th Street. It's that cool windy area like that. A lot of park benches and stuff like that, which of course I'm sure nobody is skating on or something like that. But
they put they have rails they put out in the street all the time. They have their own rails, and they close down 4th Street constantly for all kinds of different stuff, events and everything. It's like right down from the Roxy Theater in Bremerton.
Yeah. I love to see those local businesses and stuff given, actually doing something for the community like that, not just trying to set up shop and make some dollars. It's hey, we're doing that, but we're also giving people a place to go, and especially when you're talking about the times we live in today with kids that just have way too much time in zero direction. They need places like that to go. And so,
Very true.
You know, and especially it works out great because you apparently know everybody in Bremerton. You have all these
small
connections, and it's great, man.
I've lived here my entire life, so this is,
He gets around.
Yeah,
this
right.
is how I remember being a kid and feeling that way about other people's parents because my mom was not from here, but it seemed like people who had parents that were from here, they fucking knew everyone. You
My
know?
mom's the same way.
Yeah, so it was just like, how is this possible? Like, I don't understand. And now that I'm an adult, I'm almost 30, I'm like, well, I just fucking know everyone. Like, it's just, when there's 40,000 people in your town, you just know a little bit of everybody everywhere.
I have a feeling that like me dipping out for 10 years probably did not help my social circles in the local realm because you
Right.
dip out for those, especially that 10 years, the first 10 years of like your adult life.
Yes.
That's when you're making all those real long lasting connections within the community as everybody kind of grows out from high school and college and stuff like that, the people that stay. And I was just like, well, I'm out. Bye.
Yeah.
And I come back and there's some people that'll recognize me every now and then. Hey man, we went to school together or something, right? I'm like, I mean, could be, man. Like, I'm sorry, but like I don't have that much space in here for that kind of stuff anymore.
Right.
I don't remember maybe half a dozen people I went to high school with.
Well, I think you're right. If you stayed around here, and even if you didn't kick it with them, but if you ran into them
Yeah.
or saw them in the community, your memory would be like bumped a little bit all the time. So 10 years down the road, even if you didn't kick it, you would remember them.
Yeah.
And you'd be able to see them like, oh, I fucking, had this class with this guy or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, being gone that whole time, you'd lose out on any of that boosting that it's going to be. So you just cut them all out. It's no longer relevant.
Right. I do occasionally run into this gal and her husband. I knew her husband pretty well in high school, and she used to ride my bus in junior high and high school and shit like that. She ended up going out and becoming a porn star, and then
shit.
ended up coming back and all this stuff. And now they're happily married, got a couple kids and shit.
Are they his?
I would assume. I don't know.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing, man. When you think about your young adult years like that,
Yeah.
there's so much of your life that's formed, and your future is so kind of built off of that first few years. Once you kind of get out there into the world, it's very
Yeah.
interesting to think about.
Yeah.
But anyways, enough of me.
Yeah, no, with that, Colin, let me ask you this, right? So, and Josh, again, you don't have to ask this question, you're more than welcome to. Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Colin, do you think that it is possible for someone to be truly objective, right? Or do you think that we kind of have to just acknowledge or accept the biases that we have, for lack of a better term, and kind of be conscious of them and just work around them when we're trying to dissect information that we're taking in?
So as a general rule, no. Nobody can be perfectly objective. You can have isolated pockets of thought where you think as objectively as possible, but nobody is immune to biases in their lives. That's how you become a person. I don't think that's real, but I think the sooner you recognize that you cannot be objective fully, and you recognize that you do have biases, you'll be much more apt to recognize them and to be able to understand when your biases are playing into something you're thinking about. But yeah, no, that's an insane thing to think of. That's like a control group in a science project. That's not
Right.
It's purposely not. It's purposely isolated and cannot be brought into like objective reality.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a real thing. But it's a good place to like. It's a good goal to strive for, because that way you'll always be trying to think of as objective as possible. But no, that's crazy.
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I would agree. Like, we're all like sociological beings, and so your experiences will entirely affect your like objectivity. And while you might think that you can be objective, the reality is that you're going to have background information that totally affects your judgment. And I always hate that, like, whenever you're like news articles, like, oh, we're objective, and it's like, that's
Right.
impossible. Like, everyone's going to have a spin. It might be minor, it might be major, but you can't, look at something and have an objective opinion about something, because
Right.
Yeah.
you are your experiences, and that's going to affect your worldview.
Right.
Yep.
No, I think that's really good. And the reason that not the reason, but I think those are great answers. And when I was thinking about this a lot lately, after I watched the Matt Walsh documentary, right? Matt Walsh, Daily Wire. They just did a
What was the, like,
documentary.
What is a Woman?
What is a Woman? I just watched that, and as I was done, Jordan and I watched it together, and I said, I appreciate that they didn't try and be objective. Like, they were not veiled about the way they feel about this situation. They were honest about it. There was no deception, but they were open about the way they feel about it, which I appreciate, right? When we first started the show, we were huge on, like, we're objective all the time. Like, we're just going to be that. We're totally objective. We're not going to let any spin get into anything. And I think it just took us time to realize that we can't do that, right? And now I take pride in the way that we present information objectively, present raw information, right? Past that, our discussions, we are open that we have biases about it. We feel the way that we feel, and that's the way that we're going to discuss them. We think, as a show, as individuals, that freedom and liberty is the way to go. So that is how all of our opinions are going to lean. And when we're presenting them and we're reading things, we'll even go through and correct ourselves. Like, oh, I can't say that because I'm adding something to this, and that's not what they said. Like, that's not what this article says. We'll be very clear about, okay, this is opinion time now, and the further we get into this, that's what I find that I respect most about individual news companies is their ability to acknowledge their biases and not say, like you said, that they're being objective. One of the morning shows we listen to is done by ABC. It's called Start Here. They have like this podcast? It's like a
terrible.
20-minute. We listen to them from NPR, Axios, ABC. There's like several different left-leaning news companies that all of their morning podcasts, we'll listen to them all as soon as we get to work. And the Start Here one, there's always an ad for the George Stephanopoulos show, whatever it is, his weekly show. And his ad is like, we're taking the biggest stories and cutting through the spin so we can present this.
I love that.
You worked in the Clinton administration. Like, you worked in her campaign. You can't try and lie and say that you can even attempt to be objective because you're not. And that's where I lose respect for all these corporate news companies, all this type of shit, because you're still trying to present yourself as objective when the entire world, the whole country in particular, knows exactly where you sit on a particular issue, And if all of them, CNN, all MSNBC, Fox News, all of the corporate news companies would just be honest about their spin, I think they would be more successful.
Yeah, because I think if you look at bias in general, right, and objectivity, you're essentially talking about the difference between fact and truth. Like, fact is a fact, period. A string of facts together can mean something that can build you a truth, but at the end of the day, a fact is true. But
That's interesting.
but the truth comes to what you apply that fact to. But otherwise, you may, like a news outlet like ABC or something like that, could just give you the facts and then just be done with it.
Right.
And that would be as objective a news source as you can get, but nobody does that because facts,
Not anymore.
Facts alone are without context generally, and then they don't really mean anything other than a random statistic or some shit like that. So, I think it's a problem, especially in the corporate press, because they've allowed their truth to just completely take over the facts at that point. And then there's nothing but unobjective, biased opinion spun and woven around what started as a fact somewhere.
Question, though, is do you think that could we even go back to, like, it's always like this kind of idealization of like the old Walter Cronkite days where he came on, he said what the news are, it's like blank happened. He didn't give his spin and then he left. Do you think that we could even go back to that news? Like, is there an appetite that the American people want that, or is it just like, is that gone?
I think it's gone. If you ask me, I think it's gone. I don't think society as a whole could stomach that now, especially. I don't know if we ever could have, and I don't even know if that was actually the case back then. But then again, I wasn't around back then. I can only go off of, who knows how long news has always been spun one direction or another. I would imagine it's always been that way because there's always going to be people behind it. And somebody decides that this is the story that's most important to talk about today.
And that shows what stories you talk about show your bias.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that as a people, we are more conscious of that fact that individuals don't have the ability to be objective. So I don't know that we as a society would trust an individual person like we did back then because someone is going to know even if you start to trust him, like, but he's a piece of shit because he definitely is lying about something. You know, he definitely has some type of feeling about something. What is he leaving out about this? What did his writers leave out about this? Like you said, even if it's not that person, someone who's preparing this, you know, like you watch Breaking Points. Yeah. So Breaking Points, we fucking shit on them all the time, right? And one of the deals is because at the end they're always like, we're trying to build a new mainstream. It's like, okay, you're missing the point. Like we don't want a new mainstream. That's not the point. That's completely counter to what new media, YouTube, all of this shit is doing. We don't want a new mainstream. We want you guys to be yourselves on a show together.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to watch them on, like, I think the production quality is, like, important. But,
yes.
I do think that, like, I do like the ability to be like, hey, this is the topic. Let me watch a 10-minute video about it. I think that's a good thing. And I do, like, I hate at the end of every episode, it's like, I don't want that. Like, it's like, just do what you're doing. It's fine.
And I just wish Sagar would just realize that he should be more himself and stand behind his own opinions a little bit more than I think he does. Crystal's lost it in my mind. Crystal Ball, one of the co-hosts, if you don't watch the show, she has just gone. Yeah, check out Breaking Points. You can find them on YouTube. There's lots of, they put out their kind of like their main segments and stuff on YouTube.
Hashtag not an ad.
Hashtag not an ad.
For the YouTube gods. Sakes, yes. For the YouTube gods.
Plus, I wouldn't want to give them that much attention, to be honest. As somebody that's been trying to make a show for 4 years now, I look at those types of things way differently than I used to, and I judge them a lot more than I ever used to too for all sorts of different things. Like, I love their high production quality. I also think they probably don't need as many people involved, and it would probably bring them a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more if they were a little bit closer to the actual production. It might make what they talk about a little bit more important to them, and they might be a little bit more truthful. But I don't have respect for people nowadays that are afraid to say what they want to say, or to just put out like a little teaser like that, and then just to be like, hey, I want to get my 2 cents in real quick, but then I'm not going to defend it. I'm going to let you steamroll over my idea and all that. If you have something to say, silence is a lie. So do not do that. Otherwise, you're selling me something, and I don't trust you anymore.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, I still listen to their show damn near.
Still watch it all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
They haven't gone off the deep end necessarily, and I know what they are now, so it's easier to watch because I know what I'm going to get. But it's painful to watch sometimes.
Yeah, I think the one thing I will say though is like I do think there's a place for new media. One of the things I always dislike is I feel like they're always kind of complainy and never solution oriented. Like Breaking Point's is a great example. They always talk about the problems. But they're never they're never talking about candidates or policies that could fix said problems. And it's like, as a voter, like, I mean, obviously I need to be informed and stuff, but it's just like how far can we get by just bitching about the system? Like, we do that all the time. And like, everyone knows that America has a ton of problems, but like, what can we do to fundamentally fix it? Who are the candidates that makes it so like we can get in positions where we don't have to pick Biden or Trump in 2024 again?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, it just, because everyone's just going to be like, it's crazy that like that's what it's going to come, like, it's probably going to come to.
Oh, God,
because
I
it's
hope
like,
not.
we haven't, it's like you can't pass policy by just complaining all the time.
Yeah.
No, and when you do, some of the few times that I feel that we have heard solutions from them, Crystal Ball in particular, it's stuff like, the last time when she talked in depth about the oil industry, she's like, we should just nationalize the whole thing. That's not a solution. Like, you can't just take everyone's companies away and just decide that's the solution to the answer.
It's also super long term.
Yeah, you can't. It doesn't. That's not how it works. You know, we're just going to change the whole way this system has worked the entire time this country's existed. Like, it's not that simple to just nationalize an entire industry in a deeply, deeply capitalist society. You know. So I just don't.
Yeah.
It's like the flippancy about it too. It's like it could just happen overnight. You know, if Biden would just nationalize the gas industry, then it would be no problem. It's like,
It's just end the filibuster and it'll solve all the problems.
Shit like that.
Yeah.
Well, if you'd end it, then it would be no problem. But it's not that simple because 10 years from now, you'll be bitching about the same fucking problem.
2
on the other
years
side.
from now.
Yes.
Just like you bitched today about the lack of filibuster with judicial nominations. You bitch about it here because you're not getting what you want, and it's a problem for you, when it was the same party that took it out. I don't remember when it was the Harry Reid era.
Right.
But when they went in, they used the old nuclear option, and then just
So
Mitch
epic,
McConnell was
so
like,
lame.
all right, word. Well, 10, 15 years later, we are set, man.
They'll just stack 3 of them.
Yeah.
And all through the Trump administration, all the Democrats had to say was, "Oh, Trump is just ramming through all these judges." You just made it this
Yeah,
way.
you made
and
it
when
easier.
you did it, Mitch McConnell said, "Don't do this. Don't fucking do this because
Yep.
it's going to be a bad idea. You're going to hate what happens when you're not here anymore." And where the fuck are we? We now have Trump federal judges all throughout the country. You say we got
For
3,
life.
For
For life.
life. We got 3 Supreme Court justices. What are we talking about? And you have nothing to say. You don't have any solid ground to stand on and complain about the status of the current circuit court system because you fucking made it this way.
Yep.
You contrived the situation and the circumstances that allowed this to happen. You literally don't have any license at all to talk about this.
Nope.
You made it this way. So I don't care. Like regardless of whether or not I agree with these people because I don't fucking know them, you don't get to bitch about it because you made it this way.
It's like don't make policy that like your enemy could just reverse on you.
Yeah.
It just seems weird. It's like, okay, so now the threshold is lower. You give Trump a trifecta in 2016. Boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
And now, like, it's funny, like, Democrats are complaining about the Supreme Court, but it's like,
Right.
You made your bed.
Yes.
Yeah, now you got to lie in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, it's unfortunate, man. Especially because the system that we're currently in is the system that, generally speaking, most of these same people created for themselves, and now they bitch about how there's systemic failures all throughout the system, which they've all
could this
been there
happen?
for like 30 plus years. They made this, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this, and for people that don't understand that, I almost feel bad. Well, I do feel bad for them because they get swept right along in this craze of
As
just political worship.
A civics teacher, this last couple weeks has been so hard.
Oh,
The lack of understanding of how the system works.
In
it's
grown-ass adults, right?
Dude, seriously.
Yeah.
If
Right.
people just like, what's the point of voting? And it's like, you can't just win one election. If you want to change policy, you have to vote and win a lot.
Oh yeah, particularly on the elections that you never think about. All these fucking yard signs outside right now. You're driving. It's primary season, people. All the yard signs right now. Pay attention to those people. We were just right before you got here. Don and I were looking at what was her name?
Smiley. Something Smiley.
But
Tiffany Smiley?
Yes.
Tiffany Smiley. Yeah, she's running against Patty Murray, and trying to get into the Senate. I mean, and that's on a federal level. But I mean, right along with her is Derek Kilmer, and then a bunch of other people running
Tara
for
Simmons. Those
for
are all
like
local representatives.
county commissioners and things like that. Those are the people that were the ones at the county commissioners, for example, were the ones that me and you were watching, like the local, commissioners board when it came to whether or not the county was going to implement like vaccine requirements and mask mandates and all this shit. The federal government is generally really bad at affecting your day-to-day life. We've made it much easier for them over the last 20 plus years,
Right.
but
But
ideally
generally.
it's those people that you don't know of because they're not celebrities yet in the political world. Those elections are important. The people that run the school board, the people on your county commissions, that your mayors of your towns and your cities and things like that. Governor.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
We learned a lot of that from COVID.
Yes. Yeah. The governor is the president of your state,
Yep.
essentially. You think of it like that. And if you don't take it that seriously, you're doing yourself and everyone else that you care about a disservice, because he's the dude. Our governor is still, we're still in a state of emergency, or
He still has emergency powers.
he still has emergency powers.
The only governor in the United States
Yeah.
that still
Really?
Yes,
Yep.
the only one. We're one of 3 states where the governor decides when the emergency powers end.
Yeah. And unfortunately, his last election was against somebody that, we'll just call him he was like a Trumpian figure. I mean,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you had a Biden-Trump situation going on right here in our own state.
Yeah.
And
Culp didn't offer anything.
he didn't.
No.
He was the same person. He just bitched. He just bitched. Said, we're going to reverse all this stuff. All right, buddy. Well, you're not helping here. All you're doing is rallying people up, and you're not coming out with you're not solutions oriented at all. You just bitch a lot and get a bunch of people all worked up so they can give you some votes.
Yeah.
You're not going to convince every man that that's going to work for you, man.
Yeah, and a
It's
super
just not
blue
gonna work
state,
out.
too.
Yeah.
Yes. Extremely blue.
Extremely blue.
Yeah.
Not per square mile, but in the population centers,
Well,
the
it's King
real
County.
powers.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
King
King County.
County and Snohomish, Pierce.
Whatcom's pretty,
Yeah.
where I'm from, Burlingham's super liberal.
Yeah. And Spokane area, right? They're pretty blue,
city,
right?
yes.
That's
The city.
Yeah,
But
as soon
all
as
the
you
population
get outside
centers.
of the city, you hit desert again.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what
I'm pretty
everyone's
sure
like,
that's everywhere in the
"Fuck it."
country.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you see those maps, like after like a presidential election or something like that, and like 80% of the country's area is like red.
Yeah.
And then you got these little dots of blue around like that. It's all the cities. Well, because that's where everybody fucking lives.
Right.
It
Land
seems
doesn't
weird
vote.
when you look at it, but yeah,
It does.
Land does not vote. So, you said you're a civics teacher, or you teach civics
Social
at some
studies.
point.
So history, civics, everything's all under my purview.
Tell us a little bit about your career in teaching.
Career in teaching. So I went to Western Washington University, got a bachelor's degree in history / social studies, and so I can teach history, U.S. history, world history, civics. I can actually technically teach psychology, which I don't think I should,
Ooh,
but it's technically under
that's
like
interesting.
the same purview.
There's a lot of that in my reading of like the social emotional learning curriculum and stuff like that. There's a lot of that type of stuff, it seems, where they're asking a lot of teachers to teach small pieces of psychology when it's like, should you
Yeah.
do you have a degree
you
for
sure?
this? Like, do you know how to do this, or are they just teaching you how to do this and you're just going to do it? Like,
Yeah, because
that
I'm
doesn't-
pretty sure I got to pay as somebody that went to like a decade of school, hundreds of dollars an hour to go get some actual like psychology, done to me if
Right.
I want some. I'm not trying to throw shade on teachers, but I don't know if that's like in the general purview of your average teacher. It just doesn't seem like
Right.
it should be. I don't know. That might just be me. But
Yeah. So I went to Western, took a couple years off, and I went back to school in 2020, and I got my teaching certification. So that I finished school in last December. So as of January, I'm licensed to teach social studies within Washington State.
Okay.
So I've just been teaching a lot of U.S. history and civics. Those are my two main things in my positions. I had like a leave replacement, so I was a teacher for a couple months. And then I've just been subbing since then. I actually have an interview on Tuesday, so hopefully that
Ooh.
goes well.
For a permanent position?
nice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
What grades do you usually teach?
Secondary, so I can teach middle school and high school.
Oh, nice.
Word.
So that's an all-encompassing. So there's primary school, which would be elementary
Yeah,
school,
K
and then
through
after
5.
that it's the same certification.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense to me, I
Because
guess.
elementary schools, it's a lot more parenting skills. Like, you're essentially a second parent to those kids.
Right.
That makes sense.
Like, oftentimes, if you're like a first grade teacher, you probably see that kid more than their parents do. Very often.
Oh, easy, yeah.
Like, I used to work at the YMCA. I had kids who would come in at 7 a.m. and leave at 6 p.m. And so, like, they're at school for 11 hours of the day. And so,
Right.
like, they're with their parents for, 2 hours and then go to bed?
Yeah.
And so, like,
That's
you're
wild.
with those kids for a fat amount of time of their life. You're essentially a second parent.
Man. So,
We've talked about that a lot when
Yeah.
we talk about Jordan's a stay-at-home mom, and that's part of the reason is because I fucking work 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
I would rather have his mom with him for 12 hours a day
Mm-hmm.
and have Reason's mom with her for 12 hours a day than some fucking person that I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
whether even if you're a great person or whatever, some fucking person that I don't know that is going to end up knowing my kid better than either I or his mom does
Yeah.
because we want to do other shit,
well, and on top of that, like, regardless, you could know the teacher. The teacher could be one of your friends you grew up with or something like that. You could know them. You could trust them.
Could
but-
be Josh.
Yes, 100%. But at the end of the day, it's not. You're not their parent.
Right.
There's nobody on this earth that is better equipped to deal and teach their child than their own parents. Whether or not
In most
they're
cases,
teaching
yeah.
them the right things or not, I mean, that's up to them. But I would imagine it just seems like the more natural way to go. So anybody, like whether or not you have a hesitation on the generalized state of education or anything like that in the country, just that fact that you're giving over your child's education and their entire bringing up to an
A state
entirely
employee.
different a state employee. I wasn't going to go quite there, but
Technically,
yeah,
that's
a
what we are.
different person.
That your taxes pay my salary.
Yep.
Right. And I'm glad. It's one of the reasons I'm glad that you're here because I know that you can appreciate the objectivity of all of this. You know what I'm saying? That at the end of the day, a teacher, a police officer, they're agents of the state. These are people, they're employees of the state. Like these are, and that's not necessarily a denigrative thing, but that is the reality of that position that you are an agent of the state. Your job is one thing or another. You work for the state. You work for the federal government. You know what I'm saying?
So I don't know if
A
you
lot of
might
people
know
get
this
really
or
offended
not.
about that.
No,
type
I
of
know.
shit.
Right? But is there a way to, let's say you could be a teacher in like the private sector, a non-state run entity. Are they required to be certified and licensed in the same manner, or is it state run? Or
I'm pretty sure, like, if you work at a private school, you still need state certifications because even if you go to like a private school, you still have to have like state standards and stuff.
Right.
And so, well, it's different, and the funding comes from different places. Like where I'm from, Bellingham, there's a really big private school called Linden Christian School. And so, in order to be a teacher there, you still have to go through like the normal stuff. But they have different standards, usually more religious based because they're a Christian school. And as an employee, you typically need to follow their values, or at least like, and so things like that. And so, it's definitely more. They have way more control than a public school would have over their employees, but you still have to. There's still certain standards that you have to go for.
And do they have more control over their curriculum as well? Like you said, obviously they have state standards, but even outside of a Christian school, if you just had just a private school, like what the fuck do they call that?
the Montessori's?
Yeah, there's another
I
a charter school, right? A charter school is just a private account, right? Where like even if you're not religious based, you still have way more control over your curriculum as long as you're meeting the state standards, right?
Yeah, like Bilbo. Private schools in Indiana, sorry, get federal and local funding.
And one of the things we're going to talk about in part 2 is the Supreme Court case. I don't remember which one. I have it written down here. Carson versus Macon, that has to do with the school vouchers for religious schools. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about in part 2.
I find that very interesting.
It's super interesting. And I think that it kind of relates. I thought that it related a lot with the Kennedy case, just with the Venn diagram of the religious issue that's going on there. I find it very interesting. So, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more.
Oh, I had another question for another school question. It'll come back to me.
Oh,
I have like all these school questions that I'm like, all right, so how does this system really work as an insider? Curriculum. Let's talk about curriculum. When you became a teacher, you got licensed and certified, you get hired at a school. How is a teacher that is brought on, whether it be a substitute or not, how are they informed about that particular school's curriculum?
So, first and foremost is state standards. Washington State has set certain state standards that, as a teacher, I have to meet. So, first and head is the state. And then you have your district standards. They can depend. Like, for instance, Bellingham Public Schools, they do history categorically. So it's not, they don't go linearly. Like, they don't start, let's say, U.S. history. We're not starting at Columbus and ending at, like, 9/11. It would go war, social justice, or, like, revolutions. And so it would bounce around, but they're all would be, like, thematically contained.
Interesting.
Like I'm sorry not to, but like per quarter of the school year or whatever?
It
like
depends.
Units, right?
It'd be units, and then it would depend. Like a lesson on war would probably be longer than one on organizing.
Right.
Organizing. That's interesting. So we had played around earlier with your Twitter bio, calling yourself an amateur historian, right? I take it you're a fan of history. Are you familiar with Dan Carlin's Hardcore History?
Of course, dude. I literally just downloaded his Apache.
Apache Tears?
Apache Tears, and I was going to listen to that
so good.
on my run.
Oh, it's so good.
I love
so,
Hank.
As a fan of history, understanding, how do you balance I like to look at history through timeline. I feel like it makes sense because generally X plus Y equals Z. You go through the timeline of history, you get to point B because things happen in
World
point
War
A.
I leads to World War II.
Exactly. Like, how do you feel about the difference in teaching history to children now, that where you may not, you might lose that kind of timeline centered, basis of history? Do you think there's pluses, minuses? What's your take on that?
So, caveat, I think history, I prefer linearly. I think it just makes more sense. But
fuck yeah. It literally is a timeline.
But I do think that yes, his Mongol one is amazing. I do think that we have to have the caveat that a lot of kids aren't going to be entirely all there during school. And so I think it's better. So I think the categorically is kind of going more towards like, at least they get something. Like we can talk about war. So at least they'll know about like all the wars, and they know about organizing.
Like a generalized.
Yeah.
idea.
And it's a little bit easier to maybe have a little bit more concise, like 1 month lessons versus like if you miss like, I feel like if you miss like the Civil War unit, it might be a little bit harder to understand some of the more like maybe like later American like 1880s and 90s stuff just because like that history. And so I do think there's a certain merit to it, but it also does leave the kids like really confused because linearly, because if you talk about World War, let's say talk about the Spanish American War and then the World War II all in the same unit, they probably think this is a much more like condensed group of time, but that's like 50 years.
And does that kind of modularization, does that carry out through the entirety of secondary education? So maybe by the time you graduate, you could piece together all these things and have a decent timeline?
I think that's the goal. And again, that's the school district I student taught at, they just did history linearly, like the way that we typically think of it. And so, yeah, it does depend on the district and then the individual schools.
Do you know how common it is, that style of teaching for history? Because it seems like
Seems newer.
feels like it would be super confusing. Like if I was a kid, especially in junior high, if you're just starting to learn about it, it feels like it would be really confusing to try and piece together that timeline if you're chunking it up like that into just subjects of history.
Yeah, I think it could be more confusing. I like when I was doing a student teaching at a high school, and so I taught about this war is a great example, and so I went through so I started at the Civil War and then I ended at Vietnam, and so
Really?
yeah, because like I have to go through like 100 years of war, and I had like a month to do it. And so it kind of, and so like the kids, and it was super condensed. It was an interesting time.
Well, I'm sorry, what grade did you say this was?
This was U.S. history is like 10th, 11th grade there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
yeah, I think that we were juniors when we took U.S. history. I missed Land. I'm pretty sure I was a junior.
Yeah. So I think by doing that, you do get more of the conversation about conflict. Like we stayed mostly on conflict and the idea of like why do people fight and like why do we fight in World War I? Why did we fight in World War II? And so we have like a little bit of like cohesion, but I do think that like there's a little bit of I think there is a bit of confusion on I guess just like the length of things because it is hard to like, you know, if you're talking about the Civil War in 1 week and then 2 weeks later you're at World War II.
Right.
And like I did do it linearly within the war, so I think that helped a little bit, but I definitely felt like I wish I could have branched off and been talking about like Civil War and then talked about, you know, African American justice because like we had Reconstruction and then transition towards like Western expansion and then get to like the Spanish American War.
So,
but you kind of have to like put those in a little bit in order because you still need context. Like history context is king.
Right.
So I still have to put it in kind of anyway.
And that's what I was going to ask you is, do you feel like when you said you were talking about what are the causes of war, why were people fighting? Do you feel like by only talking about the conflicts and maybe a little bit of context before and after, do you feel that the kids were able to get a good understanding of why that conflict happened?
Yeah, I think so. I think it could have been better.
Yeah.
Like I think because because like I when I talked to them and I went over the work, it did seem like they mostly got it, but I do think that like you're missing out a little bit of like World War II when you can't talk about the like I really couldn't focus on the Holocaust a ton because that's not like within like the purview of conflict, but it's like
what
how
the
do you
fuck?
like it is, but like not in the conflict, like that's not like why nations fight,
right?
You know.
And so I thought immediately about Vietnam, right? Because when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, we did a whole segment comparing that to the withdrawal from Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
And I've even written a piece about Vietnam, and in my opinion, the war in Vietnam on the American side started after World War I. Like as soon as we were dropping troops there in the background to try and help the resistance, we were involving ourselves and planting the seeds for Vietnam. The same way when we were fucking with the Mujahideen, we were planting the seeds for us to be in Afghanistan 20, 30 years later, right? Yeah. And I don't know how you could. Do you even?
Dude, I'm a
how like is that even? is that part of the Vietnam War, that deep of context presented when you talk about that? Or is it like this conflict began in Vietnam and then America involved itself?
Well, you kind of like when I talked about Vietnam, I had to kind of a good example of Vietnam because like I had to take because I couldn't really talk about like that former stuff because on one hand these are high school kids,
Right,
and like
right,
you
okay,
have to understand that these
yeah.
kids are being forced to take this class, and while their investments could be like some kids could be super investment in, like I'm trying to get an
Yes.
A, like I think one of the hard things as a teacher is to understand some kids just want a D, like I just want
Yeah.
to pass, I want to get
Yes.
through this. And so it's like I wish like every kid was like eager and voracious for history like I am, but the reality is like I just had to teach it in a way that's like Russia, communism, Vietnam, America. That's like, you have to like condense it so much more. Like if it was like an
fuck.
AP US history, oh we would have drilled through that.
Right.
Yeah.
right.
But like
This
you
is
know,
just regular.
Yeah.
So that was another question that I had, kind of a general question, is how do you, as a teacher of history in particular, because I'm right with you, or the three of us, I fucking love history now. I can't get enough of it. I bought Ken Burns' Vietnam War documentary. It's one of my favorite pieces of film that I've ever seen in my
Ken
entire
Burns is
life.
amazing.
It's absolutely incredible. That was a huge base for our discussion about the Vietnam War on this show, was that documentary and other stuff that I learned from outside of that. And so how do you go about trying to make, I don't know, I just remember how boring I thought all this shit when I was in school. You know, how do you try and make that interesting for people who do just want a D, who
Yeah.
don't really want to give a fuck about it?
Yeah, I think
Because it's important. You know how important
No.
history is. We all know how important history
Yeah.
is. And even if you don't know in high school, it's extremely important, you know?
it's a hard one because I personally think that like one of the things history I think is super underserved in schools.
Yeah.
A huge
Yes.
issue is there's this kind of stereotype in the history world is you get the football coach. The football coach is the school employee. What class can we give him so that he can work and then coach football in spring history?
Because he can read through the book.
Yeah,
And
You can
okay.
hand the kids a textbook,
Right.
And so you have the stereotype of just like kids are forced to just go through like a textbook, and that's
Yes.
how they get history. And so you have, like, unfortunately, a very large portion of America who's just was given a book and it's like, hey, like read this book. We'll have a test on Friday.
Yeah.
And so it's just like I think, and then it's also super frustrating because then you can rinse and repeat that for 30 years, and then
Yes.
you're gonna retire like $150,000 a year salary. And so I think as a younger teacher, there's a certain like, I guess maybe chip on my shoulder because I want to like really change the way history curriculum is taught. Like I think it's super important to use like the senses. Like one of the things I think is super important is taste. And when I was in college, I had a history professor who we had like 1700s coffee. It was awful.
Really?
It was awful.
Ooh.
But like I remember that, and like it
Yeah.
was this like this thing that makes you like we're really doing all this stuff for this.
They're like,
Right.
this shit ain't fucking
Exact-
coffee, man.
Yeah.
What is this? Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
what people used to drink.
And so like I
They were
like
fighting over it. They were getting after it over it.
seriously.
Yeah.
And so like I think I really want to like do like a better service to kids, like using taste. Like I would love. We're talking about like explorers. Like let's make hardtack.
Yeah.
Like you have to try to eat like one. It's super cheap as me as a teacher to make.
Yeah.
And two, I think it'd be like cool for kids to be able to like taste a little bit of what it would have been like. Or they learned about this thing called like cucumber ice cream. Apparently that was a thing in the 1800s.
Yes.
And so just like I think using the senses in a much better way would be a way to get, at least if they don't, I can't get them to love history, but at least I do think it'd be more interesting as a student if like, oh, we were talking about Christopher Columbus and then we had hardtack. And
Right.
it just like it would just
Ooh,
connect
yeah.
that thing more. I think so.
Let me ask you kind of a three-pronged question, right? Would you...
That's just a great idea.
Yeah.
Yes, that's an excellent idea, right? So would you rather, and have you been looking for, or have you looked for jobs at a private school where you might have more freedom to do that type of stuff? Because if you present that proposal, that curriculum proposal to a principal, to a headmaster, whatever you're calling them at that school, right? And I don't even feel like you have to be that open-minded. Like, that's just a good idea, If you present that to them, I feel like they're way more open and more able to, like, fucking go for it than a principal at a public school. you
Yeah.
know?
I guess I haven't really like as I've been playing for jobs. I haven't really seen a ton of private school stuff on that, but I do
Gotta
know,
be harder to
I
get.
do know that actually public schools pay usually more than private schools.
Okay.
So a lot
That
of
doesn't
times,
surprise
Like
me.
guarantees of what you have to make,
Dude,
even like
so-
as a base.
Well,
like-
public sector unions. I mean,
Right.
like here's an example:
Fuck yeah, the teachers union. Yes.
a full-time teaching job in a school district. Which one? Stanwood, 70,000 a year starting.
Whoa.
So you have this stereotype of teachers getting low pay.
So I
It's
thought
not
teachers
bad at
didn't
all.
make shit.
It's
Yeah,
no.
that's
Like-
more
like-
money than I make.
Like we and so like versus I think it's probably be more of like 50,000 a year at a private school,
Okay.
and then it increases by years and stuff. And
Yes.
so I think because of that, public schools typically tend to be more competitive than private schools, often because there's usually like a religious angle to it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, private schools get a lot more funding for classrooms.
Yeah.
Like I was talking to one of my coworkers, and he was telling me that like his history teacher had the funding they made a phalanx,
Whoa.
like
That's
like to
cool.
show how it would be like a defensive thing.
Oh.
They had like little cardboard shields and spears, and to show how that would have been like a good defensive tactic, they made a phalanx, and it's
shield wall.
yeah, and it's just hard to imagine a public school having the funds to do that unless, as a teacher, that had to come out of my pocket. Like I'd have to go
Right.
to Rite Aid and or get like Lowe's, get some boxes and make it,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is worth it. But that is going to have to come out of my pocket. Whereas a private school, there's usually funds for that.
And it seems like, and this is a total assumption just as you're talking, it seems like if you were at a private school, the programs that exist probably are really well funded, and it might be harder to start a new program, you know, but once you have it there, they'll probably throw fucking money at it just to make sure it's good, you
Yeah.
know? And so I bet private school sports are generally pretty good. You know, they have obviously good uniforms and good equipment and stuff like that. You don't have, there's not as much, I don't know, it's just better, I feel, you know?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Bilbo Swaggin says you remind him a lot of his old history teacher, and he loves it.
Yes. Yeah, we've got a couple people. Bilbo, obviously, huge in
Yeah.
the comments. Zeke is here, so.
Shout out
Yeah.
Zeke.
Yeah.
Hello.
So let me ask you this question, and I don't know how much exposure you would have to this, but we often talk about the over-bloated budgets in a school district, right? The amount of money going to schools, and we understanding the fact that from what we have been able to glean, the majority of the money goes to things like administrative costs. Have you seen any of that come through? What does a school administration look like? What's the makeup? What kind of institution is siphoning that money essentially out of the actual classroom and into like the administrative body of the schools?
So I have a lot of thoughts about that, and it's hard because I think schools are typically trying to do do the best thing, and they add on employees to do the best job to serve their kids, but at the same time that brings in a lot of bloat, and so there's a lot of positions that are, I wouldn't say unnecessary, but there's
They're additional.
additional. I think additional. Like there's some times where it's just like for instance, sometimes, and it's not always like the school's fault. Like for instance, if a kid gets in like legal trouble and something happens to the point that they cannot be by themselves and they have to be monitored, the school has to then hire an employee specifically for monitoring that one student.
Ooh.
So that means that person is now an extra $30,000 is going to the
Plus benefits and
plus
like,
benefits
yeah,
is
the
now
whole-
going
the
to that
whole deal.
employee to make
Yeah.
sure that one kid, that one child is getting these resources. And so you have this interesting like conflict of like every student needs to be served well. I entirely believe that. And the school needs to serve each student well. But how do you do that you can't do that while trying to hold a budget, or obviously there's budget, but like while trying to pinch pennies and things
Yeah,
like that.
and you can't forecast for it either because you never know. Like, what's an example of like a situation in which a child would need to be? Is it like something where they have problems at home, or they?
Usually, if I don't know like the details of it because I don't exactly. That's usually principal stuff. But like if a child does a crime, like to a certain extent, they literally cannot be left alone.
Okay. Like
And
if the
so-
child itself commits a crime or something.
Yeah. And so they need to be monitored at all times. And so even to go to the bathroom, they have to have. Because as a teacher, I can't leave to watch them go to the bathroom. So they'll hire a person.
you're doing your job.
Yeah. So they'll hire a person to be there. It's like, hey, I need you to use the bathroom, and then they'll go with them. And you can't just hire that person for like an hour. You have to hire them a full-time employee.
Yep.
And so you add that by big school districts are going to have a lot more of those positions, and then you have like the different departments like the sped department, which has a lot of paraeducators to help all these different kids, and so that's like a super expensive department as well. And so
The special education department.
you have a lot of people and then at like the district level you have a ton of people who are doing different jobs, and I don't know how much that entails, but there's a lot of HR-ish stuff that's kind of I think there's a lot of bloat within that, but it is kind of I guess I can't say too much on it, but it does feel like there's like why is like 3 people who are like kind of feel like they're doing the same job.
Yeah, and I feel like that shouldn't surprise anybody, because when you think about it, generally, state school districts and stuff like that, I mean, it's a state-run bureaucratic machine, and as we know, bureaucracies generally do one thing very, very well, and that's just expand exponentially over time, because that's just the general nature of all bureaucracies, whether it's state-run or not. But
Yeah, Bilbo, there's about 25 schools in this district.
In your
It's
district?
Yeah. It's really big.
that is a big district, man.
Yeah.
25 schools.
Yeah, a lot of elementary schools and then a couple of middle and high schools. And so,
I remember first. I can only guess as to what would cause someone to need to be watched all the time. I do know when I was in high school, I used to do drugs in the bathroom all the time. So I would
You're
imagine.
that person that took
I imagine if someone was caught doing something like that, you'd probably need to be watched all the time, because you definitely would get in legal trouble, and you probably would, if you were let to go back to that school, you probably would need to be accompanied by someone all the time.
and it's, also schools are trying to move away from expelling kids. And so instead of expelling them, then oftentimes will have, usually use more resources to make sure they stay in school, which means that they need to hire staff to do so.
Yeah, because you expel a kid, there's only one way. Generally speaking, there's only one direction that kid's going, and it's probably not going to be good.
Yeah.
Because I mean, let's face it. I mean, if you're not at school for 8 to 10 hours a day or involved in some kind of school district activity, what are you doing? The parents aren't going to be able to just take the entire day off. They're not going to switch their entire lives to homeschool or something. That's
Right.
It sucks because there is so much. I don't know why I'm so passionate about the state of state education, because I'm not a parent, but it is important to me, and it's very
So
different.
it's still your tax
Yeah,
dollars.
your tax-
It's
You own
still
a
my
house,
tax
it's
dollars.
still your
Yes,
tax
this
dollars.
is
You have a
true.
vested
And you
interest
don't
in-
have
Yeah.
kids. That's
Well,
exactly why it matters, because
Yeah.
you don't have kids.
and I have the understanding that it sounds so cliche, but kids are our futures. I mean,
This is true.
these are the people that are going to grow up and be productive or unproductive members of our society. And
He's Dax's godfather.
that's right. I have a little flag that I planted
It's
that
a small stake, yes.
But I think it is
Look at
also
that,
hard
just as
for
you said it.
people to like me, who are a little bit older than you guys, that this stuff is so foreign to me, because these things never. This whole system never was in place when I went to school. It was a much more cut and dry type of situation. Very
Dude,
hands
even
off.
as this was
Yeah.
like 20, even my schooling, like it's drastically different than what I've seen.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for a lot of people to try to understand maybe the newer demands that are put on school districts now from both the legal side and then the social side as well. I mean, there's lots of
Right.
external pressures that are being pushed on these institutions, and bureaucrats aren't necessarily the best people to be making those calls all the time, because but who does at that point? But if that's the machine you have, I guess that's the route you have to go to. You're kind of chip committed, because that's, unless we completely reinvent the entire state of our institutionalized educational system, which I think, to pivot off of this, which is why I think school choice is so important. What are your opinions on school choice, and how do you think it might be more beneficial or less beneficial to kids?
So I have a lot. Like, I guess my thoughts would be, like, I like the idea, I really do, but I think that idea Yeah, we graduated in
Yeah,
2013 too.
Josh and I both graduated in 2013.
I
That's
think
you bunch of young kids.
I feel like that idea is really only is much more attractive to middle and upper class people. Not because that doesn't like help the lower class, but if because school choice, I don't want to like be wrong on this. School choice is more the idea that like the student should have money that's allotted to them, and they can choose to put that where they want to.
Yeah, it's usually like generally it's referred to like a school voucher system,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like,
But the reality would be that 80 to 90% of kids would just go to the local school anyway.
Yeah.
And so, and like, well, and like, the problem that I think would happen is let's talk about like CK.
okay,
So, the stereotype was that CK was a better high school than Ole, right?
right.
Stereotype. So what would happen is that all of those parents would probably try to get all their kids, even more kids, to go to
They
CK.
did it anyway. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
like-
even they did it anyway.
Exactly. And if it was easier to do that, you would just essentially have this kind of segregated system where there'd be super good schools because everyone wants to go there, and they put their money there and they get more money, and then their parents are usually better off, and so then they can put their time and money into the school system, and so they have amazing sports, amazing
Yeah.
clubs, and then these other schools would be left like a little bit more high and dry because the people there are kind of, you might be poor and you can't transfer your kid to the other place. You
Right.
might be just not have the time, and so it's just like ultimately I think what would happen is it's already happening now. Like
Right.
Your zip code affects like a
Yeah.
lot of your like education opportunity,
Yes.
which is sad, but I think some cases it would get worse.
Yeah.
Can I steel man you a little bit?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know that I necessarily feel this way, but let's just see where it goes. So the argument generally to the counter would be that the school voucher system would force those schools, the ones that could stand to lose revenue, it forces them to try and be more competitive, to eke out something in there, whether it's sports or a particular program, something that's going to set them apart, that's going to make students and make parents want to send their kids to that school. Do you think that what do you think about that?
I think that could happen. I think there's probably a lot of cases where it could happen, but I do think that there are a lot of there's only so much trying a school can do, but if the kids and the parents aren't invested or they don't have the means to be invested, you're really does it matter if you have an amazing German program if the kids don't know if they're going to eat at home?
Yeah.
And right.
And I think part of the reason I brought that up is because I there's a lot of talk these days about school choice. A lot of the new governors and stuff that are getting into this midterm race and stuff like that are talking about pushing for school choice and all this. And I think it's kind of a fallacy. I do not think, because of the things you're talking about. Yeah, at one point we do school voucher system, right? And it might work in a city like New York where you have PS 112 over here and it's kind of a shitty school. It's in a bad neighborhood, whatever, but you could just take the city bus and you can go across town and then you go to the good school. Well,
PS 124.
Exactly. Right? But at that point, what happens there is already, if there's a better school somewhere where people actually have access to it, at some point there's going to be a waiting list because schools can't just exponentially grow over time. They're state-run systems. The idea of school choice is very appealing, but I think you cannot do it in our current educational system. The way it's run, you can't, for one, the administrative body behind that would have to grow exponentially too, because how the hell do you track one child's dollars with them to another school?
You'd have way more counting.
It's insane.
That'd be so much bloat.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
So let me push back on that. First, I want to tell Bilbo that I wrote down about the JCPS school district. I just wrote that down here. Yes, he asked us to look into it, so I'm going to take a look into that.
Louisville.
The money. When I was reading about the case that we're going to talk about later, I'm fairly certain I would put money on that's why I'm going to say it now. In the
Dollars down, baby.
the Carson versus Macon case, right? And when they're talking about that school voucher system, only part of the money travels with the student. There's a certain amount of the money that stays flat within the school district. And I would imagine
That makes sense.
I would imagine that is for things like the food program or for shit like that you have to have available for kids there.
Yeah. Like
so-
whether you have one kid that goes to that school or 500, the amount of funding towards that school for that particular program is not. It's going to stay static.
There will be food there for the kids that go there, and so it's only part of the money that they get to take with them. And it says in what I was reading that's mostly for school supplies and whatever the other costs are going to be that go into the classroom outside of the other shit, the base services that need to be made. So those services, to my understanding, right? And again, it doesn't matter. But to my understanding, are always going to be there. So the concern for food that exists now with students would exist within a voucher system the exact same way, because the money is going to be the exact same.
Yeah.
At least in the way that it's written out. Obviously, things play out as they go. But that's in pushing for a school voucher system, that's the base idea, is that those services are going to be there no matter what.
Yeah. And then it's just a matter of whether or not you can, if you have the means, does the school have availability? Because that's always going to be a thing. If there's always going to be a better school that anybody in your community can get to,
what about like a lottery system?
Well, then you run into
like charter schools and stuff, or just the schools that are better. You mean at that point?
I think with the lottery system like that, inevitably, especially in today's world, you're going to run into the inequity arguments of it's just not fair to put it to chance like that because somebody is going to be in more need than others, and it's just. I don't know if I would like anybody's kid to be subject to the will of a draw.
Your
future
to go to a
is
better based school. Off of a draw.
Yeah, and this is why ultimately I like the idea of school choice and all this stuff, but I just don't think that in our current educational system, the framework that we have that's been around since the 40s or the 50s or whatever shit like that, it's not designed that way, and it's not designed to operate the way it should be now, and that's why it's so drastically different everywhere you go, and everybody's trying different programs. I mean, depending on where you're at, I'd be interested to look up that JCPS district and stuff like that and just see how, because that sounds terrifying, or other voucher programs or charter school programs that people are doing. But the way that the framework is set up around schools and school districts, I don't think there's much wiggle room for a structural change that would need to be had if you really wanted to make school choice really truly available. I mean, I think it would be insane to think that if you didn't offer school choice, there aren't going to be a certain fraction of people that can fully take advantage of that and are going to have a much better life and a better education and all this good stuff. But there's going to be a lot of people that just can't participate in that program for one reason or another.
Right.
And it's just. Well, I like the idea, but I think there is a fallacy in thinking that school choice is the answer. It just, without a fundamental structural change of the entire education system, the machine behind it, all you're doing is just kind of you're working on the margins, and you might help some people, but at the end of the day, the system's going to be as. Not to insist that the system is broken, but it's going to be as broken as it is today. It'll just be a little better in some places and a little worse in some places. The fundamental problems that people have with education itself, the curriculums, the course, when you come out the back end after graduation, that level of education is essentially going to be the same regardless. I don't think you're going to get a better or worse in any actual, tangible fashion. But that's just me. I like it. I also just think it's kind of a talking point at this point.
Yeah, I think the idea is good, but I feel like ultimately if you implement it, it would largely end up with a similar system we have now.
Yeah.
Like some schools are better than others and some schools are not.
Yeah. I think the easiest place to start would be changing the funding mechanism to schools, making it not reliant on
property taxes?
Yeah. I don't think that's the right way to do that. It made sense, I think, in some capacity back in the day. But at that point, when you do that, when you have an area of a particular school district that is kind of, more in poverty, those schools are going to be worse. And you have the more well-off areas, those areas are going to be better. Whereas if you took a broader approach to like a statewide, that way all the money from all the people making 6, 7, 8-figure salaries in the big cities, that money gets evenly distributed amongst the people that grow up in some tiny ass city
In Kentucky.
in some tiny little town in southeastern Washington, something like that. They'll have an amazing fucking school, but at that point, the super amazing schools in the cities are going to drop down. Everything's going to level out, and some people are going to be worse off. Some people are going to be better off. But I don't know how you would do that. But the funding mechanism being reliant on your zip code, I think at this point, is an insane way to think about funding your schools.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense to me, because already there's inequities everywhere, obviously. And if you want a static education, the funding mechanism needs to be static somehow. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's too much of a logical leap to try to assume that. It just kind of seems like basic math to me.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Do you want to know what is the best way to determine what a child's success is in elementary school?
Please.
If they have dinner with their parents.
Ooh.
That's it.
That makes sense.
The children who have dinner with their parents do drastically better than kids who don't. And it's just
makes sense to me.
That's like it doesn't matter. Like the teacher and stuff matters, the school matters, obviously, but more than anything, do they sit down and talk with their parents? Because I think it's an indicator of a lot of things, like a good family structure. It means an interest in education, because oftentimes at the dinner table you talk about school today.
What'd you learn?
Right.
What'd you do at school today?
Yeah, usually if you're able to have dinner, there's usually funds that means that you can afford to come home around dinner time, talk to your kids and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like I don't know, it's super interesting to me.
That makes total sense. I mean, it's the same kind of deal with, do you have one parent or two at home?
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's a drastic difference in whether you're going to have a better turnout or not.
Your general success.
I can look at someone's grade and probably with 80% accuracy know who's raising them. Like, you can see, is it single parent or grandparents?
Yeah.
You can just look and you know.
Oh,
and it's
wow.
so it's crazy how accurate it is. Like, oh, this person has a 98%. Boom, both parents, like 90% of the time.
And I think, so I'm thinking a lot, right? And when you're talking about school choice and whether or not it would broadly help people, I was thinking about myself in high school, right? When I was in high school, my parents are divorced, so I was living with just my mom for like a huge part of that time.
Yeah.
And when I left for high school, she was still asleep, was like getting up towards the end, and then was still at work for probably 2 or 3 hours when I got home. So even if there was a voucher system available, she would not have likely been able to take advantage of that without incurring extra cost for whatever it is, for transportation, for something, for me to be able to get to and from that school on a daily basis, because it wasn't going to be realistic for her to. She could take me to school, probably. She would have to get up. That would be sacrifice of sleep, that's your own deal. But she wouldn't be able to leave work early to come and get me,
Yeah.
So I think that, that's very
Are
interesting.
you smoking weed in the bathroom again? Yeah.
No, and I never,
I mean,
It's a nicer school,
do
though.
that? Come on.
exactly. They have vents in this one, so you can't get caught in it. That's the whole point.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I love how this first segment went from let's get to know Josh to let's just fucking hammer out and fix education. Let's just do this.
No,
We did it.
That's why
It's
it's
problem
here.
solved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. We've been going for about an hour.
We can just move into the next segment. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Cool.
Unless I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
no,
off.
no.
There's something you wanted to.
No, not really. I was looking at the time. We could do this for probably 3 hours alone, just sitting here talking about this, because
Yes.
I have so many questions about just education and systems. And
We'll come back to it in part 3.
there you go.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah,
we could
100%.
definitely do that.
Yeah. So, you want to hit this one last topic? You want to talk about Kennedy, or you want to go to the next topic? And
We can talk about Kennedy real
All right,
quick.
let's do it. Okay, so we'll talk about this and it'll lead us into the next segment, right? So this is one of the cases. We've talked about this a few times as it was being discussed and as they were waiting for the decision. So it's the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, right, is what the Supreme Court case was, and they ended up ruling in favor of Joe Kennedy.
What was
they
it?
did.
6-3?
6-3,
Probably
I believe.
6-3,
Yeah, and I think the decision came out like right after we were here, maybe like
Yeah.
the Monday after we were here, something like that.
Yep.
'Cause we were kind of waiting for it, mostly just because it's local. It's been very weird to hear people say the word Bremerton.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Coach from Bremerton. It's like,
Yeah.
Whoa! Just because it's a made up word, So I don't know where the root of it is, but it's a made up word outside of it being a town name. So there's no other reason anybody would say it. So it's just weird
Yeah.
to hear it.
When I hear Bremerton, Washington on like the NPR morning podcast, I go, "That's fucking weird,
Yeah.
man."
Yeah.
But,
Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes. So they ruled in favor of Judge Kennedy, and for anybody who is the first time that you're here watching this, or if you don't know that much about this case, Judge Kennedy, or excuse me, Coach Kennedy was praying in the middle of the field, and it ended up turning into a group event in which he was there. I guess that's the argument, whether or not he was leading, right? He was not necessarily leading a prayer, but was conducting, I feel, is a safe term, and I'm not trying to put it, because they found it in his favor, so it doesn't matter, right? He's conducting prayer in the middle of the field. There are other people there. He wasn't coercing anybody. He wasn't forcing anybody. So they Post-game, yeah, after the 50-yard line, and it was a private thing that he was doing initially. And the concerns came up when a rival coach complained about it, coaching staff complained about it, and then it turned into
Had they lost that game?
And I don't know whether or not they lost the game, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had.
Salty.
Right?
Yes, because the very next game that happened after the issue started, Coach Kennedy went and talked to the opposing team. It was a different team, obviously, because it's the next game. Talked to them, and a bunch of that coaching staff joined him in the middle of the field that game. So it was just that particular coach or some of his staff that had an issue with this practice.
It only takes one.
It had been going on for years prior to the school district or the school even knowing about it or having any type of issue with it. So he lost his job. I think it's unclear at this point whether or not his job is going to be made available back to him. But he did. I told you before the show, I told both of you guys that he did say he was willing to come back and take the coaching job again, which I found surprising. But
I think it would really depend on who the current coach is and what their record is and whether or not they want to fire him or not.
Right.
Because it's not like throughout this entire time there hasn't been a Bremerton football coach.
Yes.
And so at this point, if he wants to come back, somebody has to get fired.
Right.
Or let go. And that's...
It's also not like the Patriots. It's Bremerton High School.
Again, we talked about that. It's a 3-4 year thing, So it's only...
Gotta hang out home to 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
Yes.
The real prestigious position of a small town football coach in high school. But were you making a point? Sorry. I didn't mean to
no,
cut
that
you
was
off.
it. I was just kind of summarizing what had happened.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because I think the real important topic on this story itself is the pushback after the opinion has come out. And we'll talk more about like another version of this because it comes into like the First Amendment practices and freedom of religion and association and freedom of speech and things like this. And a lot of the pushback is the argument of, well, there is no separation now between church and state. So when you hear the argument that, okay, well, now there's no separation between church and state now because now coaches can just get out there and they can force the kids to come out and pray on the 50-yard line and things like that. What's your take on that particular take?
I don't buy that because I think there's this idea that like there's a difference between like the Pope controlling the state and like you as a person having religious values and then having them in a public space. Cause like it's all like if you're like a Christian, you're gonna vote based off your Christian values. Like why wouldn't you? That's your if you're a Muslim, you're gonna vote based on your Muslim values,
right?
Or like your Jewish values. And so this idea that like separation of church and state means that your religious values will never enter into the public sphere is impossible. Like no one's saying that.
Right.
I think some people believe that.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Yeah, and so it's interesting how like I guess this whole Coach Kennedy case is kind of I don't know shown that like some people really don't understand what church and state means.
Yeah,
it's like there's a huge difference between like Biden saying that we all are going to pray right now,
right,
versus like Joe Biden being a practicing Catholic, which he is, and so it's like he like the president takes communion, like yeah. Like that's entirely okay.
Right. Yeah, he has the freedom to do that. Whether or not he's wanted by the Catholic Church or not, he could still identify as that and still practice his own religion no matter what he wants to do just because he's a public employee. And I think you made the point. I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the separation of church and state is.
Yes.
When we were talking about kids, for example, be like prayer in school, like if you're going to pray before the beginning of a class because the teacher that's their policy or that's the school's policy, that is an example of you need to separate the difference between church and state. If a kid wants to pray in school by himself or herself or themselves, that's their freedom to do that.
Right.
Just because you're on the grounds of a public institution or a government institution doesn't mean you can't practice religion. It's the government forcing religion on the populace. That's the separation of church and state. And I think that is, from all the takes I've seen with this, and including the case we'll talk about in part 3 with the school, the religious school vouchers and stuff like this, people have a fundamental misunderstanding, like many things, that especially like we talked about last episode, there's a misunderstanding of what that really means. And so when they see this, they make the false assumption that you can't have any religious practice at all in a public institution, which is just backwards and wrong. That is not the case. That is not the way this whole deal works. And to assume otherwise just shows your ignorance.
Right. And I think, like you're saying, like many things in politics, this can be easily remedied by looking back in time, right? The country was founded partially for people to have sovereignty of religion. That was like part of the whole jam. That's obviously part of why people came here. So exactly, right? So the separation of church and state, like you said, is not to separate the people from their religion. It's to separate the government from infringing on that. And that's the same. Part of this was decided on the Establishment Clause and the Establishment Clause. And that says, I don't have the exact quote, but it's that the government can make no law infringing on your religion. That's the entire point. It's there in the Constitution. So it's
the first one. It's kind of important.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it leans back to what you were talking about maybe before the show of, as a civics teacher, how difficult the last few weeks have been. If like this is a basic concept that forms the government that you live under. You know, you should understand what this means. It's important, even if you have nothing to do with politics, even if you just work as a logger or something like that. You know what I'm saying? In the middle of the woods, you're never talking to anybody. It doesn't matter. It's important that you understand what the basis of your country is so that you know the powers that you're living under. It's never ceases to surprise me how little people know about the country that they live in, you know?
Yeah.
Especially when it can so deeply impact their life, when the Supreme Court is going to make a decision about something and they don't even understand the basis of it.
Yeah. So I guess a question I have for you guys is, in the dissent, or the Supreme Court, some of the justices talked about the fact that it seemed like Coach Kennedy was giving extra playtime to the people who did join him in prayer. And so he was kind of implicitly, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a good old boys club.
Yeah, he was discriminating against the people who might have had different religious opinions and did not want to join in said prayer. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, I have thoughts, but what do you guys think? Like, because like if you're like an atheist and you're not getting much playtime because you are not praying with the coach.
I would initially say that, much like the difficulty in a lot of criminal law, you would have to prove intent, and that is damn near impossible. I mean, it would be really difficult unless this guy was really explicit about that to prove that. And you can't look at the side effects of that. You know, what's to say these people aren't just, maybe they're not
salty, they didn't
maybe
play
they're
enough.
just not that good.
Right.
You know, I mean, who knows? I mean, there's favoritism with all coaches, I would believe. I mean, I played a lot of soccer growing up. You saw it everywhere. It's hard not to assume that, especially if you're somebody that's not getting that much play time. I'm not getting a chance to prove myself or whatever. There's no true way to really find out if that's the case. And understandably, it's understandable for somebody to make an assumption like that, but it terrifies me that a Supreme Court justice would want to go down that path, especially understanding that they're the highest court in the land and they're a judge. And how the hell are you going to prove that he had the intent to do that? By putting that in your dissent like that, you're putting that piece of dissent in people's minds to go out there and run with it, because what if that happened to them or something like that? Law is incredibly it's incredibly complex for a reason, right? Laws are supposed to be very, very hard to. They're supposed to err on the side of the defendant, right? You need to really, really, really prove that somebody broke this particular item in this law for it, for you to be ruled against it. And when it comes to cases where intent is involved, you cannot prove that unless, most of the time you can't prove that unless you have a piece of evidence that can prove that.
That's what's stated at some point.
Yeah.
That this is my intent to do this. If they told
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
or something like that, and even then, it usually has to be like written or recorded because it's
Yeah.
just hearsay. If I tell you that this is my intent, I could be
Exactly.
lying even then.
Yeah, and for intent to be proven, you just generally you can't do that, and
Right.
to operate off that assumption is just you're doing the entire justice system a disservice at that point. Which, because I think that was Sonia Mayor that wrote
I think
that.
so.
is it?
I think so.
Yeah, and
Those-
that doesn't surprise me coming from her because she seems to be very personal when she writes in her opinions, and that there's no basis in law. There's so many cases we've talked about even here on the show where like, okay, well, yeah, you'd have to prove intent, and you can't do that. How do you prove intent? Unless you have a piece of evidence. Otherwise, you run the risk of persecuting somebody unjustly.
Yeah.
And in the era of social justice, how do you not see that as a problem? You're just because you don't like the way it turned out, you can make the assumptions that this is bad or he was bad or whatever it was. It's a really, really bad thing to be in the Supreme Court now recorded forever, because the sentence not going to go away. It's going to live there forever now, and people can go back to that and try to make a precedent off of it or
Quote
refer
it,
to it.
yeah.
It's not a good. It's a very damaging thing to the overall justice system, which is already on pretty shaky ground as it is these days.
Right. When we were in junior high, I played football in 9th and 10th grade, right? And in 9th grade, you're automatically on varsity because you're a freshman in junior high at that point.
Such a weird system.
And it was very
Ruined me
weird.
forever. I'm
was-
like, why are these 8th graders the top of their class?
Because anybody you talk to outside of the district, they're like, "What are you talking
Yeah,
about? Why do you have a
exactly.
junior high?" You're like, how is it not all this way?" And I didn't get very much playing time. There was a couple people that didn't, and I never. And then when I played in high school, I was swing playing. I was playing varsity and junior varsity my first year in high school. I never considered that there was any type of malicious reason as to why Rusty Wilson chose to not play me. Like at some point I said something about it and then got playing time, And so I assumed that it was because most of the people that were playing varsity also played in 7th and 8th grade. So they had been playing at a certain time. When you're talking about football, team sports, there's a team cohesion that's there. If you have a group of kids that have been playing together for 3 years, they already know how each other moves. They already know things about each other. They've grown up together, you know what I'm saying, in that sense. So, especially in sports, it would be very difficult to prove why he did something, I never considered that there was any type of Rusty Wilson liked me way more than was
Sounds like a second
Coach
movie.
Albie.
Right?
Yes. Rusty Wilson. Yeah, no, he
Trademarked by Russ Wilson.
yeah, he liked me way more than the high school coach did, and I got way more playing time in high school. So, yeah, I agree with you. It concerns me to think about that and think that in the time of just woke people and crazy people who take a thing and blow it out of proportion, that someone, my mom, you've met my mom, right? She's pretty far to the left, and you had somebody who was less stable in their mind could take a situation like that and fucking blow it out of proportion about like, oh, is this because my kid isn't religious? Is it because he's a quarter Mexican? Is it because this? Is it because of this? And that's a scary thing, like you said, to be planting in history like that.
Yeah.
That could be scooped up if you find the right type of activist lawyer that's going to spend the time to dig through all the dissents in any case that might be relevant and try and build a case on that.
And I have some sympathy for like high school coaches too when you think about it, because on the professional level, right, you have X amount of people on your team for a determined amount of time that is going to be more than 3 years, generally speaking, right? Or the main core of the team.
Yeah.
And you need to work out the player dynamics, who has, who does better in this place, and, where are your losses and your gains, and who's the best and who's the worst, and blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of move players around, and you give them certain times, or certain people work better together than others, and this and that and the other thing. But when you're dealing with high school sports, there's a lot riding, especially with the juniors and seniors, I would imagine in particular, because there's going to be scouts at certain places, kind of like
Right.
trying to pick up people for colleges. And do you, as a coach, really want to? I mean, you're going to have to. Do you have to totally go equity and give everybody completely equal playing time, regardless of
You're trying to
how
win.
the team's working? Exactly. You're trying to win the games, man. You're trying to get a good record for your school so you can hang that banner up in the gymnasium and shit like that. So I have some sympathy for those coaches because, yeah, he may like you. You may be a great player, man, but maybe you don't jive with this particular core. Maybe I got plans for you next year, man. We're losing half the varsity team to graduation next year. I've seen the way you play in practice. I know how you do in scrimmages. All this good stuff. Like, I got a spot for you next year. Maybe he's thinking about that. Maybe he's not. Maybe he just doesn't like the looks of you, or maybe he.
Right.
Who knows? There's too much at play there, and we're not going to play thought police about this. And so I have a lot of sympathy for these coaches, man, because the more you start to think about it, they're under a lot of pressure too, from parents, school districts, so on and so forth. Just the name of the game
My kid's
itself.
playing for the Jags.
I'm sure that for every kid who played under someone who, even like Larry Dixon or someone who went on to play for a college or professional team, I'm sure there's a kid who played under them. It's like, if I only got more playing time, I could have fucking done the same thing. You know? But same deal. If you have someone, if Marshawn Lynch is your high school running back, are you going to let anybody else run the ball, or are you going to give him the ball every fucking time because he's going to score a goddamn touchdown?
Exactly.
You're going to let him run the ball every time. You know, if you have a freak ass quarterback, are you going to let him hand the ball off, or are you going to let him fucking throw it?
Exactly.
You're going to have him throw it every fucking time because he's going to get the job done.
Yep.
It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
That's got to be a tough thing for those guys, man, to kind of balance. And then they're trying to just also work on just, growing these kids up in that environment, because there's so many benefits to just being a part of a team and playing a competitive sport like that.
So you don't want to crush the spirit of the
Exactly.
second man because he's never going to play. So
Exactly.
you don't want to crush the spirit. Yeah. When we were in junior high, I don't think they did it in high school, but in junior high they had a thing. I don't know if they did it in every sport, but in football they had a fifth quarter. Right. So for kids that weren't going to play in the first four quarters, there was a fifth quarter of the game that was
Not
obviously
how math works.
was not a real it was not good, and because it doesn't feel good to play in the fifth quarter, if you only play in the fifth quarter, it doesn't feel good. So but that's like, it was designed, so everybody's going to get playing time. It's probably one of those fucking equity things that's like, we're going to make sure everybody gets their time on the field. But like I said, if you only play in the fifth quarter, it doesn't feel good. And they designed that for like non-cut teams, because in junior high, I think in high school too, the football teams were non-cut. There were not enough people to make cuts. So you kept everybody that tried out, but it just
on a sheer numbers
time,
game.
But your playing time was determined on how good you were. So if you were shit, you could be on the team and you would be at practice, but you were really only going to play if somebody got hurt. You weren't going to play in that position if you were not good enough. But they weren't. I don't know if they weren't allowed to. I don't know exactly how that system came about, but they were non-cut teams for football. But baseball was a cut team. Like, there were other sports that were cut sports, but it was just football. So
Interesting.
Isn't football teams, they're much bigger?
usually, yeah.
Like, you need an offense and a defense.
Yeah, but there was, in high school and junior high, there's a lot of double play. There's a lot of people that play on offense and defense. That's very common, especially if you're good. If you're just a good general athlete, you're going to be on the field more because you can handle more play. But if you have shit stamina, they're going to, even if you're good, they're going to switch you out a lot because they don't want you to gas yourself out in the first half of the game and then not be able to do anything in the second half.
Yeah,
so
you're just a special teams guy at that
so
point.
a lot of that, it depends. Yeah, but I know especially in junior high and high school, there's a lot of double play. A lot of that goes on.
That makes sense.
And maybe it was just because we were non-cut teams, but I got to imagine that it happens a lot all over the place. When you start to be in college and professional, it's a little more risky. You have more on the line when you're on the field, so you want that person to be in their specialized position as opposed to doing whatever. Like I said, if you're just a good general athlete, if you're good offensive lineman, you can probably be a decent defensive lineman if we need you to be in there, because you really need to just run forward and be disruptive, you know? So if the core is there, then you can do the same thing. There's a lot of skills that translate to either side of the ball. There are a lot of running backs that'll play linebacker and stuff like that. A lot of wide receivers that play quarterback as well. Though it's the same side of the ball, but that's still very common, like for people to just play multiple positions in junior high and high school.
Yeah. If you catch, you better be able to throw.
Well, and there's a lot of people, especially if your intent is to go far, small sports, I guess, but if your intent is to go far, it behooves you to be able to play more than one position, because if you maybe get on a team and they don't need another quarterback, but you can play wide receiver, you can train and get better at wide receiver and then maybe get more playing time, get more money, right?
Yeah.
That's very common. Cordell Patterson is a great example of that. He plays for the Falcons. He signed there as a wide receiver last year and played running back like 70% of the time.
That's interesting.
Because they needed him there, because all their running backs are shit. That type of stuff happens all the time.
And I can see, like, especially when you're, like, with a wide receiver especially, right? It would be good for you to know how to play quarterback, because you guys are teamed up all the time. You got to know how those different positions work together. And then maybe even then with the wide receiver running back just seems strange to me, because they're usually of a very different build. Those type of humans, and you want a beast mode tank guy like Marshawn to be able to just run through a wall of humanity, versus the long, kind of gangly Sherman with like the giant ass arms and the super long legs, makes him be able to fucking run like a lightning bolt.
Right.
Isn't
very
Debo
different.
kind of both?
Debo Sim, he is enormous, and that's what makes him one of like the freak style athletes, is that he is an enormous individual and is also able to.
I'm learning.
Yeah, he's extremely fast. I think he's 6'5". I mean, it was the same deal for like Cam Newton was the same type of deal. Cam Newton was like 6'5", 235 pounds. That's a large person to play quarterback, because he's also super fucking fast. So that type of stuff does happen. Taysom Hill is another example. He is a tight end for the Saints, but when Drew Brees wasn't playing, he played quarterback. He's a great quarterback. He was totally serviceable. So it just depends, when you're that high status, it behooves you to know how to do more than one thing, so you can stay on the field all the time. You're always in the eye of the fans, of the coaches, of everybody who's there.
And this is why you should have the freedom to pray on the 50-yard line after a football game.
That's it. That's it. With that, we will take our first break. We'll be back in just a few minutes for part 2. We'll talk about some more Supreme Court cases.
Yes. Let's do it. Thanks, guys.
Much.
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready.